Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us on our webinar today on designing an expanded learning time program. I'm Nora Najelski-Eichner, the Executive Director of the New York State After School Network. While we're getting started, it would be wonderful if you could take 2 seconds to fill out a quick poll so we have some idea of who is joining us on the line today. Wanted to let you know while you're doing that we are going to be joined by 2 fantastic presenters today. Caterina Leone-Menino, who is the Director of Extended Learning and Intervention for Rochester City School District, and Tracy Bennett, the Director of Action Research at Think Together in California. And I'll provide a little more information about them as we get to their sections, but I did want to share that information. So fantastic. Looks like we are getting our results today, and we have a number of folks from school districts as well as community-based organizations. So thank you all so much for joining us. The agenda for our presentation today, we're going to briefly discuss how we came to develop this guidebook on adding 200 hours and developing an expanded learning time program. The focus, as you might guess from the title, was driven by the New York State mandate for most priority schools that they add 200 hours starting in the fall, but it also ties in very nicely with the new expanded learning time RFP that we are expecting the state to issue sometime this summer based on the introduction of funding for that program in the state's budget this year. So we'll be discussing briefly those 2 aspects of opportunities in New York State for expanded learning. We will then talk briefly about the value of community partnerships, and Tracy is going to provide us some information based on some cutting-edge research about how community partnerships really can increase the impact for students. We're then going to take a look through the guide briefly and understand a little bit of what we've outlined for an effective planning process and some of the resources that the guide is making available. Then I'll turn it over to Caterina, who can talk about the process of establishing an expanded learning time program in Rochester, where they've now successfully run a program for this year and are in the throes of implementing it in several more schools for the coming year. And we'll then have plenty of time for questions at the end. So for those of you who are not familiar with the New York State After School Network, we are a public-private partnership that's dedicated to promoting young people's safety, learning, and healthy development outside the traditional classroom. We think very broadly about out-of-school time and the ways that we can increase students' social and emotional growth, as well as their academic achievement and their career engagement through out-of-school time programming. We're very lucky to have a number of fantastic partners in both the public and private sector, as well as 8 regional networks across the state that provide opportunities within localities to share information, do peer-to-peer learning, and support the development of high-quality programs across the state. For those of you who have not yet had a chance to actually look at the guidebook, it is available for free on our website, and the link is available there. You also can access it directly from our homepage. We've made it available as several files because it is quite large. And I do want to emphasize, again, that it is free, and so we certainly hope you will download and share. And second, that we have been updating it as new materials are made available or new resources come to our attention. We will be uploading an updated version later today or tomorrow that will include some of the information that Tracy is going to share from Think Together's research. So please do access it frequently and often and share with folks as you can. The guidebook was developed through a collaborative process that started here at NYSAN with our Capacity Building Committee, which is our committee that thinks most heavily about high-quality programs and how we can encourage them across the state. We, from that Capacity Building Committee, developed a work group of folks who had experience with expanded learning in some form or another, and they gave us a day of their time to really think through what a process is for developing a program, how we can encourage programs to really be high quality from the beginning. This guidebook was then vetted through both that work group and the Capacity Building Committee, And we really are very grateful to all of the folks who contributed their time and resources. You'll see as you go through the resources in the guide that a number of different organizations across the state, and in fact a couple of national organizations as well, were generously shared the resources that they have compiled. And we're hoping that having them all in one place really will be an asset for those of you as you're trying to decide how to design a high-quality program. And you can find a list of all of the contributors in the guide. The important changes in state policy that we think are driving a lot of interest in expanded learning time across the state include two major changes. The first was the addition under New York's waiver from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of the expectation that most priority schools, those implementing school turnaround and transformation models, would add up to, or at least 200 hours to their learning time beginning in the 2013-14 school year. The State Education Department has outlined a number of expectations for this time, including that it will be offered to all students in the school, except in cases where the school is not receiving any SIG funds. They do expect that this time could be voluntary or mandatory, but if it is going to be voluntary, the goal is to reach at least 50% of students. They do recognize that it may be beneficial, and this is something we will talk about a little bit in the planning process, that it may be beneficial to have separate programs that target separate subgroups of students, but the goal then is an overall reach for the whole school. And finally, and importantly, the additional learning time is really supposed to be about reaching out to students on the social emotional and this engagement as well as the academics. The goal is that it have opportunities for hands-on learning and other kinds of activities that engage students who may not be engaged by traditional classroom instruction. And I think this is a really important opportunity here and part of why we are excited about the role that community partners can play in planning and implementing these kinds of initiatives, because it really does create an opportunity to leverage community strengths in addition to the strengths of the school, traditional school day. You can read all of the information that SED has put out about this 200 hours requirement in Appendix A of our guidebook. And I really want to stress that the summary that I've provided very briefly here is a quick summary of some fairly complex information. We are not the State Education Department, and I certainly don't want what is outlined here to be taken as any official statement. So please do take a look at the official SED guidance to make sure that the programs that you're developing are in line with what they have outlined their expectations to be. The other force driving interest in expanded learning time in New York State right now is obviously the governor's proposal and the legislature's approval of a competitive grant program for an expanded learning time initiative. This funding was in the budget for this coming year at $20 million. The RFP has not yet been issued. We are expecting it will be issued sometime this summer. The goal here will be to add at least 25% learning time through either an extended day or an extended year. And we'll be looking for schools or school and community partners, and we at NYSAN have been advocating heavily for the importance of community partners in this application process, particularly for programs that are looking to do something different with the time, which is part of the overall goal of the RFP, is to evaluate these programs in terms of comprehensive redesign of the school day or year. There is a emphasis on middle school students in grades 6 to 8 that was included in the budget language. I do want to highlight that for those of you who are thinking as school districts about potentially applying for this grant, as that I suspect may impact your planning process. Again, in Appendix A, you can find the most recent information that was provided by SED to the Board of Regents about what was in the budget and what their expectations are for this RFP. If you sign up for NYSAN's listserv, we will send out the RFP the moment that we have it, and certainly we'll be encouraging folks to think deeply about how they can apply effectively for this time. Before I turn it over to Tracy Bennett to speak a little bit about her research on the value of community partners, I wanted to emphasize that we really developed this guide because we believe that many school districts across the state and many priority schools are already thinking about how they can partner with community organizations for expanded learning time. And we also deeply believe that those that are not yet thinking about it would very much benefit from doing so. The community partners can bring a wealth of experience and resources that are distinct from and complementary to what the school day offers. And one of the things that we always try to stress is that community partners are not there to duplicate what teachers do. Teachers do amazing, wonderful things. They're there to be a supplement, a complement, another way to approach students and activities. We really do emphasize the importance of reaching out to families and engaging families as part of the community, and that's another strength that community partners really can bring to the table. So we are hoping that all of you will be thinking about how you can use community partners to form strong expanded learning time programs. To talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to turn things over to Tracy Bennett, who recently completed her doctoral dissertation at the University of California, Irvine, focused specifically on alignment between school and after-school programs, and uses that work then to help develop programs for Think Together, which is a major provider of after-school and expanded learning opportunities in California. They actually currently partner with 40 school districts. So the work that she is going to be sharing with you today really draws from a deep base of experience as well as research data to highlight the importance of effective school-community partnership. So Tracy, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Well, good morning. Oh, I guess not good morning. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be here. What I'm going to do is provide a very top-level, simplified overview of 4 years of research. Brief background is that Think Together actually funded a fellowship to UC Irvine, which basically paid for my 4 years of dissertation research. All of my research was on Think Together programming, so it was a win-win for both of us in the sense that they got some publishable research on the types of programming and efforts that they're doing, and I got to earn my degree in the meantime. So post-graduation, I came back here, and now I'm in charge of data collection and working with our staff in data reflection and making data-driven decisions. So just a brief overview of the research. We're talking about 4 years. The overriding theme was to identify promising alignment practices that can impact student achievement. So the first year of research was really exploratory and qualitative in nature. We took a broad look at test scores in all of our districts with Think Together students versus students that aren't in our program. What we noticed in one of our smaller districts in Los Angeles County was that those students were actually outperforming students that weren't in the program. So when we looked deeper into that, we wanted to know what systems and structures were in place in that district that might have promoted that type of achievement for the Think Together students. And what we found was our Think Together site coordinators and staff were deeply embedded in the school culture in the sense that they were actually going to data reflection sessions weekly by each grade level with the principal and grade level teachers and talking about student needs. So teachers were literally giving a list of students that were in the after-school program and the types of strategies and instruction that they could use and modeling it for them. So we then, after that first year of research, we thought, well, great, let's do that in all of our districts. So as you can imagine, it's not as easy to just knock on a district's door and make these happen with our program. So what we did is we developed a measure of alignment. We thought, let's take a pulse across all of our districts where everyone else is on these types of strategies, and let's see if there's any impact based on where they are in these strategies on student achievement. So we did that really deeply in one district in Santa Ana Unified, which is a big inner-city high English learner population, and we really fleshed out our definition of alignment. Year 3, we decided to replicate that study across most of our districts. We were able to include 26 districts in this study in the final dissertation, and we were able to kind of validate the findings that we found from that year 2 of research. Year 4 basically was just writing up the dissertation, getting it ready for publication, and also the defense. So when entering any sort of research endeavor, you got to have your kind of theory that you're testing. So this was Think Together's theory of alignment based on that first year of research in Little Lake City School District. So in the types of strategies that they were doing there with our site coordinators, we identified 3 subscales of alignment. The first one being academic resources. So that's basically what is the school sharing with the after-school program? Do they have access to computer labs? How about curriculum or pacing guides or student data for individual needs of students in the program? What were they sharing with us and how were we using it? And then there's communication. Obviously, a big relationship builder is communication. But when we were talking about communication, we weren't talking about how often you're talking, but in fact, when you talk, what are you talking about? So there's a big difference there. So are you talking about curriculum concepts? Are you sharing information on policies, discipline strategies, anything related to school culture? What are you talking about when you talk? And then the last one being partnership. So does the school like the after-school program? Do they trust each other? Do they value each other as partners in promoting student academic achievement? A big hurdle in the beginning for a lot of our programs was that we are a one-off of the school day as opposed to a true partner in collaboration and promoting student learning after school. So we really wanted to test that out. And the theory being that if you have all three of these between program and school, you have a high-aligned site, and that would promote student academic achievement. So what we did was administer a survey to all principals at our schools and also all site coordinators at our schools. And to be considered highly aligned, you had to have the site coordinator reporting high levels of each of these subscales and also the principal reporting high levels of all of these subscales. This is basically a very simplified version of the statistical modeling of the dissertation. So what we did is look at the combination of being highly aligned on academic resources, communication, and partnership, again, meaning that principal and site coordinator are both reporting high levels of those three subscales. And we looked at each individual scale and then also cumulative. So I was really curious if maybe just one of these scales is driving alignment or driving any sort of impact on student achievement. What we found, as you can see, is at highly aligned sites that were highly aligned on academic resources, meaning they didn't need to have the other subscales, just academic resources, we saw a positive impact on their California Standardized Test scores in English Language Arts. Then we really found a lot of gains in math. So sites that were highly aligned on all three and each individual subscale, regardless of the other ones, there were positive effects for their CST scores in math. So that kind of validated our theory. That's similar to what we had found that second year of research in just a single district. So expanding it out to 26 districts actually validated that theory and helped create a replicable scale. Then throughout the review process at UC Irvine, we had someone suggest, well, why don't you look at those sites who aren't aligned, and is there anything going on there? So we did the same thing, just flip your conceptual framework a little bit, in that you're creating different scores. So if you have a principal who's saying, oh, yeah, we're doing all that, or a site coordinator saying, oh, yeah, we're doing all that, and the other respondent is saying, no, we're not, that's a misaligned site, meaning they're not on the same page about goals and what they're doing in programming. So what we found is sites that were highly misaligned on all three, there was actually a negative, statistically significant negative impact on the CST score for math. And then those that were misaligned on partnership had a negative impact on math as well, partnership only. So being misaligned just on partnership actually had a negative impact on math. And then we tested for interactions with attendance. And what that means is if a student was going at a higher rate to one of these misaligned sites, what did that do to their score? And we found, again, a negative impact on the CST score for math. This actually was a bigger takeaway of all of the research because the measure of alignment basically validated our theory, and it makes sense. If you have a good partnership, a good relationship, you can expect to see growth in academic achievement. I don't think anyone really expected any sort of statistically significant findings for misalignment, but that's actually a bigger lesson that we're communicating to our staff right now, is that if you're not aligned, not only are you not helping, but you actually could be hurting the students. So this was a bigger takeaway for us. So what have we done since then? So the past year or two, as I have come up with these results, I've communicated them out to our staff. So I meet regularly with all of our regional staff statewide here in California, talk to them about data, and give them strategies and implementation tools for their site and building that relationship with their principals, and not only their principals, but also their teachers. We have full-time site coordinators at each site. They're paraprofessionals, not credentialed teachers. So we really work with them and giving them tools to communicate with their administrators. The next step, which was just as crucial, was communicating these results to our partner schools. So I am deeply involved in creating trainings for each of our principals and site coordinators to sit together and talk about it. And then obviously the end goal would be aligned collaboration and goal setting across program and school so that the school is truly viewing the program as a true partner. So this is an example of a very simple tool that we use in the beginning with our principals and our site coordinators. They sit side by side. I review all of the research just like I am for you, and then they actually sit down and have collaboration time to talk about what they think they're already doing right, and then what are some opportunities for growth. So what are they doing in each of these categories, and then what can they be doing that they haven't been doing. And then they actually set goals based on alignment, and we touch back with them throughout the year to see how that's going. Real quickly, lessons learned. As you can imagine, there's varying degrees of comfort when talking about data. So I obviously am very embedded in data collection and reflection. Our staff isn't, so a big part of my job is to communicate that to them. And also you'll find a wide array of experience for principals and teachers. Some of them are very data-driven, some other of them are not. So being able to sit with everyone in the same room and get on the same page about what the data is saying and how can we apply this in program is key. So, and obviously communication is key at both levels. So it's not just about, like I mentioned earlier, talking to someone, but when you're talking, be structured in what you're talking about and make it a regular thing that both parties are committed to. And then planting the seed as an investment partner, that basically just means promoting after school as more than daycare. So especially at our elementary sites, we want to be able to be a partner in promoting learning in students, so we got to be able to plant that seed so administrators do understand that we're there to help students as well. And then lastly, create aligned goals for programming. Whatever you set as goals should be what gets measured. So we want to make sure that we're on the same page with the principals and teachers in establishing goals at their site. And then I think that is it for me. So I will take any questions at the end during question time. I'm happy to discuss it.
Thank you so much, Tracy. We really appreciate. So as we are transitioning into a review of the guidebook itself, I would love to hear from all of you on a quick poll as to whether you currently have a school community partnership that you're working with, or you have an idea about one that you would like to develop. And what I think Tracy really brings to this conversation that is so crucial is to help us understand the ways in which after-school programs that are closely aligned have begun in many places, including with Think Together, to really begin melding into to something that's closer to an expanded learning time model. And that really gives us an opportunity to leverage the research that has been done in the after-school field, which has a much longer history than the expanded learning time field, so that we can really learn from their best practices to help create a really high-quality expanded learning time program. And I think the research that she shared has really drives home in an impressive way a really core piece of information to think about in planning these programs, which is that strong communication between school leadership and community partner leadership can really have a tremendous impact on students' academic outcomes, as well as we deeply believe in other factors like their social emotional growth. But I know for many of principals and school leadership at this point in time, academic outcomes are really part of the biggest challenges that priority schools are thinking about. And so it is important, I think, to emphasize the role of a strong partnership in meeting those academic needs. So I am excited to hear that so many of you actually already have a partner that you are working with. That is great news. And I'm also very excited that almost everyone, if they're not, has one that they are thinking about working with. I think that's a good sign for this process. So wanted to turn now briefly to our actual guide, which I know is why many of you are on the webinar, and just to briefly outline the process that the guide takes and then talk through the resources that are available within it. So the planning process that we outlined here is really one, again, starting, as Tracy mentioned, from the data. We know that schools are being increasingly encouraged to be data-driven and to really use the resources that are available to them to understand what their students need. We want to emphasize from the very beginning here that this data includes teacher input, parent input, student input, that it is not just the test scores themselves, but also conversations with the community that is hosting the school, and also, again, with the teachers themselves who have a tremendous knowledge about what it is that their students need. The next step then, after really gathering what data you have, and again, too, I should emphasize, this is a place where schools often already have a lot of this information. They have possibly already identified what the challenges are that they're facing. If they're priority schools, many of them have gone through a planning process as part of their priority school plans that they have to submit. So you have a lot of this at hand, and when this guide looks a little large and overwhelming, I want to emphasize that what we're doing here is really trying to break things down into small steps. We're not saying that most of this information has to be recreated from scratch. I strongly suspect that most principals are going to have a lot of this at their fingertips, and what they don't, we're trying to lay out ways that they can easily obtain that information. Once the data is gathered, the principal and the school leadership team have really thought about what their needs are, what their assets are in the community, what opportunities they have. We then recommend that they think about what kind of an approach they're going to take. Are they going to develop a program that serves the whole school? Are they going to develop a program that serves certain subgroups within the school, or a series of different programs that will serve the whole school in total, but might be directed at different subgroups by grade, by student need, by a variety of different factors to create a whole school model. And I will emphasize here, too, that it is very important if you are thinking about doing this for either the ELT grant or the priority schools, that you check what the requirements are of the grant as to whether it is whole school or subgroups or some combination thereof. We then are recommending that schools think strategically about how they're going to use this expanded learning time. 200 hours or 25% is a tremendous amount of additional time, and it will be a drain on student energy, quite frankly, and there is some research to suggest, based on some models in other states, that if the time is not well planned, students can actually lose focus and lose energy. So it's really important that the planning for this process think strategically about how to meet student needs, how to fill in gaps, how to add something that is different and exciting and will get students energized and engaged and really take advantage of this time. Based on the strategy that the school wants to pursue, it's then really important to choose a partner who can help meet that strategy. And from the moment that the partner is chosen, we're really emphasizing the importance of engaging that partner completely and fully in the planning process. And this goes right back to the research that Tracy just showed us. If the partner is fully engaged, if there's good communication, good alignment, if resources are being shared, then you're going to see positive outcomes for students and really make this investment worthwhile. The partner and the school together then should plan how the expanded learning time is going to be used and set the schedule that makes the most sense for the students that they're trying to serve. And we, again, have laid out a variety of options for how that time might be scheduled, looking at both extending the school day and extending the school year. There are a lot of developmental things to consider with different schools and students. There are issues around what else the community has available, where the parents see the needs. All those things should be considered. And finally, we really want to emphasize that this is a growth process. It will be continuous. There will be tweaks and modifications made. There needs to be communication back with families and with students and, again, with teachers. Is this working? What can we do better? And this is something that Katarina, I think, will speak to a little bit from the Rochester process. We want to emphasize this is not static in any way. So the actual guide itself, if you haven't looked at it yet, each section is structured very simply with a brief overview of the section and what the goal is for this page. Some guiding questions, and we've set this up like a workbook so you can actually take notes within this so that as you are either as a school leader yourself or as a team of folks planning and preparing together, you can jot down ideas and notes. We've offered some key considerations to think through to help guide your thinking in this part of the process. And then lists of resources. We've hyperlinked where they're available online. If they're not available online, we've actually made them available in the appendix. And again, the goal here is to have the best thinking in the field pulled together into one place so that you don't, as planners, try to be searching down resources at the same time that you're trying to plan this very exciting new opportunity. A couple of key things we want to stress here about the guide and the planning process that we've outlined. The order was carefully thought through and heavily discussed by the work group to try to achieve a process that we thought would be most effective based on the experiences of folks who have designed and run these programs. But we also recognize that it is going to be idiosyncratic for each school. Certain parts of this may have already been completed as part of their planning process as a priority school or part of earlier conversations. So each page can also be pulled out separately if need be, so that, again, we don't want to make this seem like an overwhelming, impossible task. Use what is useful to you, let go the things that are not. We also really want to emphasize here that a lot of this can be done very informally. We are not suggesting that this has to be sort of a intense consultant style, process that is run through carefully with, each page checked off before the next one is gone to. Use this as a guide, use this as a way of facilitating conversations that you will be having anyway as you plan this process. Don't feel like it's a burden. Think of it as a way of structuring and streamlining things that you likely would already do as school leaders or as part of a leadership team. And finally, some key considerations to really think through here for the whole process. The community partner that is chosen is really key, and they should be brought in as early as possible and worked with as comprehensively as possible so that there is good alignment from the get-go, and so that resources are shared and everyone is on the same page about the goals and how they're best going to serve students. And finally, it all comes back to the students. Think about what the needs and the assets are of your students and how you can design a program that helps fill gaps and strengthen where they are already strong. So make this really a student-centered approach to this kind of programming. Within, then, the guide and the appendices, there are a couple of different tools that we really wanted to call out and highlight, as these may be some of the most useful to folks as you're thinking about your planning process. The first, and you can find in Appendix B, are sample surveys for students, parents, and teachers to help them give you feedback as school leaders and planners on how to design your ELT program. Again, really want to emphasize here, these surveys can be done informally. They can be done as part of other surveys that you are already doing. If you do a parent satisfaction survey, if you do a roundtable with your teachers, planning for the next year, or if you have each grade level doing a team meeting, that can be incorporated there. If you have a student advisory council, they can be reached out to and have an informal conversation with the school leadership team using these surveys as guidance. So again, it doesn't we're not meaning to suggest that you have to issue a formal survey through SurveyMonkey and collect and tabulate the results, but these are some questions that we hope will guide you in getting the kind of data you need to design a program that really will serve student and community needs. The Children's Aid Society, National Center for Community Schools, who have been a tremendous resource across the nation and, in fact, across the world for folks designing community school programs, have a substantial needs assessment toolkit that they're making available to folks through this guide that they have used to help schools identify community assets as well as community needs and plan on for leveraging those resources in designing a community schools or an ELT model. This tool really can be used throughout the whole gather and analyze data section, although I think we've linked it specifically to one of the early sections there. In Appendix E, you will find a fiscal map of a number of different funding streams that can be used to help fund an expanded learning time program. Not all of these streams are going to be available to every school. Many of them are competitive grant programs, and so they may not be available in the coming year. But we did want to really outline all of the different places that schools and community partners may want to look to see if they can find financial resources to help support these programs. We have provided a link to the after-school outcomes inventory. So this was a fantastic document created by our partner, the Partnership for After-School Education. And they really went through all of the different ways in which expanded learning opportunities, either as an extended learning time program or as a more traditional after-school program, can impact student growth, looking at academic measures, social and emotional measures, college and career readiness, and health and wellness. And they identified outcomes that schools or community partners or parents or students themselves might desire, as well as tools that could be used, either free or low cost, to measure those outcomes. So for programs trying to begin, as Tracy said, from the beginning with having their measures for success aligned with their goals, this can be a tremendous resource to figure out how to measure some of the things that you might want to achieve with your ELT program. In Appendix G, you will find a resource directory that we compiled that will give you contact information for a number of different youth-serving agencies or for the state association for that youth-serving agency so that you can identify potential local partners, some of whom you may not yet have a relationship with. We're hoping that this will be particularly valuable for schools in more rural areas where we've heard that there is concern about being able to identify sufficient community partners. And I really want to emphasize here how many different kinds of organizations are interested in youth and are often willing to partner. We will certainly call out some of our great partners like Cornell Cooperative Extension, which runs the 4-H's and is available in every county in New York, the youth bureaus, which again are available in every county, the Ys that are in many, many of the counties across the state, but also encourage people to think about their library systems, their local museums and historical homes, any kind of workforce investment board or a regional economic development organization very often has youth programming or has a concern about how they're going to grow the workforce and might be interested. And your local business community. Don't ever forget the opportunities that you might have from reaching out to them. Particularly for folks in the technology sector, there's a growing interest in trying to increase the pipeline of students who are prepared to take those kind of jobs, and they can be a great resource. We also want to mention briefly again, to circle back to this theme of quality. It is very important that the partnership be based on a high quality model. That is where the research has really suggested that the outcomes for students and for the community are achieved. So we make available on NYSAN's website and also linked here in the guide a free self-assessment tool that can help programs figure out if they are following nationally recognized standards for best practices for an out-of-school time or expanded learning time program. And this can be a great tool for school leadership teams when you're meeting with your community partner. In fact, we know from several of our organizations across the state who do 21st Century that they actually use the QSA to structure their meetings between the community partner leadership and the school leadership, so that they'll review an element a month or 2 elements a month and really use it to facilitate a conversation on where the program has strengths and where it needs to work on improvement. Finally, the last resource we wanted to highlight is the framework for assessing school community partnerships, which is developed by the National Center on Time and Learning. And some of you may be familiar with NCTL for their work in Massachusetts, where they've really helped develop the extended learning time program there. And this partnership document really will, again, help to facilitate a conversation between school leadership and community organization leadership. Is our partnership reaching standards for best practice? Are we communicating effectively? Are we sharing resources effectively? What can we do to strengthen our partnership? We will be adding in the tool, the matrix tool that Tracy showed you a few minutes ago as yet another really valuable tool for, again, facilitating those crucial conversations. And you can look for that update tomorrow. The second half of the guide then is really focused on providing examples of model programs. And we know that school leaders are creative thinkers that really want to design a program that is going to work effectively for their building, their community, their students. But we also know that it's often easiest to do this when you have resources and ideas to sort of spark your brainstorming and spark your thinking. So this model program section was pulled out based on grade levels. There's a section for elementary models, one for middle school models, and one for high school models. Within each of those age categories, we included examples of adding time during the summer, adding time at the end of the school day, and adding time on the weekends, so that, again, we could provide examples of different approaches that schools might take in planning this expanded learning time. Each model has some information about the school that is involved, the community partner that is helping with the expanded learning time, the features of the model that they've developed and adopted, how they are measuring success for that program, and then some brief information about what funding they're using. So again, we really hope that all of these models will give folks ideas about how to develop their own unique partnership that really builds on the strengths of their students and their community, to find a model that will work effectively based on, again, students' developmental needs, students' academic needs, what the parents have identified as needs. If you're looking for programs that are going to serve younger children, for instance, they very likely are going to need care after school when the parents are at work. If you're talking about older students, it may be much more important that the expanded learning time is done in such a way that it gets them some career experience or some internships or apprenticeships to really leverage what they need at that developmental stage. I am going to turn this over now to Caterina Leone Menino, who is the director of the Extended Learning Time and Intervention section of the Rochester City School District. And Caterina has really been the front lines of implementing expanded learning time in Rochester. So I've asked her today to talk a little bit about their planning process, their experience in doing so, and the lessons that they have learned that we hope will be of value to all of you as you're thinking about similarly offering developing an expanded learning time program. So Caterina?
Great, thank you. So we could talk a little bit about the process that we did in the 2012-13 school year, which was a pilot. We had one pilot at school number 9, which I'm going to talk to you more in depth about, and then we also piloted at one of our high schools, Northeast College Prep. And I will say that, let me go into some of the detail about school number 9. Some of our key partners there were a settlement house, which is actually housed in the same physical structure as school number 9 on the other side of the facility. Mercer Literacy Foundation, which serves as a public-private partnership. They come forward with, in partnership with one of our local colleges, Nazareth College, to train teachers and tutors in best practices for small group reading instruction and literacy support. And then we've worked in depth throughout the entire school year, not just with the pilot schools, but also additional schools, both in collaboration with the National Center for Time and Learning and the After School Corporation, in going through a 10-month planning process for implementation in the 13-14 school year. And so some of the program features at school number 9 were specific around developing a framework that lengthened the school day and also utilized community partners in doing so. So with the ESEA waiver that was offered to us around the use of Title I dollars to support, that used to be set aside for supplemental educational providers, we utilized and leveraged those funds to help school number 9 implement this expanded learning program. Additionally, school 9 last September or last August submitted an application to the state for the School Innovation Fund, and that application was approved, which had a model of technology integration and a real STEM-centered focus for the use of the expanded learning time. So planning, let me say that as you're getting ready to do this the first time, know that the process itself will make you humble, because you think that everything is set up on paper and looks great until the first day that kids arrive, and they're not only there for 6 hours and 20 minutes, but they're now there for 8 hours, and there has to be something scheduled for every minute. And what we recognized was that particularly the community partnership relationships require continuous strategizing, collaboration, and true intentionality. And especially partnerships that have been existing, as I said, so these organizations have been co-located for years and years. And once we went from coexisting programs to true collaborative integrated programs, even with a long-standing positive relationship, there were certain pieces that we needed to iron out, and it's just a continuous improvement process. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons learned, is that it really requires us to think to walk into with an open mind and being ready to accept mistakes as part of the natural process, and also learn how to clearly communicate very meticulous details and expectations to avoid any potential problems with misunderstandings or, the interpretation that something was one way when in fact it was another. We included the principal, parents, partners, and the faculty as part of the planning. The school looked at what they could do to better help move student achievement. And I think this is one of the this is where the out-of-school time world is crossing into the academic school district, state accountability world, is really in this expanded learning realm. And where we have all of these other hugely beneficial outcomes, the social-emotional skills development, attendance, just independent life skills development, leadership skill development, affinity learning. In the end, when this becomes a joint effort with a school district, our schools, particularly in the area of priority schools, are really being held to tremendously strict standards in terms of student achievement. And so, as Tracy talked about in her research, it's the alignment of that vision, both from the school and the community partnership, that truly brings the synergy necessary to move the needle on student achievement. As we look at the features of what we provided at school number 9, teachers were given the option under a living contract to work either the full hour workday, the full 8 hours that students were there, or to stagger their schedules. Some came in early and left early, some came in later and left later. And we attempted to utilize community partnerships to fill in the gap. Now, Baden Street Settlement was a recipient of the Advantage After School funding and is the recipient of local United Way funds to provide their traditional after-school program. One of the difficulties in working through the front end of this change is that some of that funding comes with expectations that are around 3 hours of continuous after-school programming, or OCFS regulation and fingerprinting versus NICED. So there's certainly some alignment that still needs to happen at the systems level to help make the ELT work a little bit more smooth for schools that are implementing and community partnerships that are implementing. So what we wanted to offer students was the opportunity to receive targeted, differentiated academic support, but also receive a variety of engaging enrichment options. So we have students learning sign language. We had students doing robotics. We actually had a STEP team. And, some of the, what starts to happen is that some of the common challenges faced by after-school program providers or out-of-school program providers around youth development staffing and having consistent staff rolled their way into the expanded learning as well. So our STEP team, for example, had, I think, 6 different instructors before the school year was over. The positive out of that was that students continued to lead the group and actually won awards and performed locally at various competitions based on the opportunity to go into something that they loved. So even as an outcome of that, we wanted the health and wellness outcomes, we wanted some group and team building outcomes, but we also were able to develop leadership skills in some of the STEP team members, and they really took the opportunity and became shining stars and examples of student and youth leaders. So as we look at the lessons learned during the pilot, and we don't have yet analysis of the full student outcomes, we're looking for increased student growth rates. So we're looking for students that participated in expanded learning to have accelerated learning rates on the assessments that are measured by the state academically. We're also looking for some of the social emotional indicators, both behavioral outcomes and student engagement outcomes, and looking at this month in July to really analyze that data fully, and as we get more returns on the state data and state assessments, to continue to look at that and examine the impact of expanded learning, particularly in a priority school that took the opportunity to focus their instructional time and expand it and extend the opportunities for students to learn beyond what has been the traditional classroom.
Thank you so much, Katerina. That was really helpful and very inspiring. I can vouch for just how impressive School 9 is from a site visit that I was lucky enough to be able to do. And if you were to ever get a chance to pop into Rochester to see it, you really would see a place where the entire school community was clearly really actively thinking about how they could best meet student needs in a variety of different directions, engage students passionately in their learning experience, and thinking creatively about the school day and the school year in a way that really looked again to see how the community resources could be leveraged along with the school resources to meet student needs. So we are now going to take questions. But as we're sort of doing that, I would love to hear from all of you about how you're planning on using the guidebook, what you see the opportunities in your community are for a jointly planned expanded learning time program. You can add questions into the chat box for me or for Tracy or for Katerina, so that we will all have the chance to offer feedback and information on them. So while we are taking questions, I wanted to ask Katerina, as people are sort of typing in their questions and their answers to the poll, how has the experience you've now had with sort of a year of doing this at School 9 and at Northwestern, is it Northwestern Prep, Northeastern Prep?
Northeast. Mm-hmm.
Northeast. How has that then influenced your planning process for the schools that are coming online as expanded learning time starting in the fall?
So I will say that last summer at this time, I was pulling my hair out because we had just been approved for implementation in September, and went through a crash 6-week, like on top of everything else that needed to be done, quick planning process without the support of the national technical assistance providers that we were lucky enough to use during the 12-13 school year. So I kind of put some stuff together based on what I had known and used in summer school programming and planning, and the incorporation of community partners into our summer learning as a district, and utilize that to bring together school teams. And so I think that the biggest lesson learned is to be very strategic and methodical and take it slow. And I love the templates in the guidebook because they prompt you to have your staff and stakeholders truly think through some of the issues that tend to arise when they're not thought through ahead of time. So I think the biggest lesson has been to take the time to plan. And so with our next cohort of implementation, we have taken 10 months to plan. And even so, 8 schools went forward with the planning, and only 5 of those schools will be implementing in the next school year. Others have been given more time and will get some more support to really strengthen and enhance that planning and make sure, like Tracy spoke about in her research, that it's fully and tightly aligned with the vision of both school improvement goals and the strengths that partnerships bring to the table to enhance and support student needs.
Thanks, and I appreciate that perspective. I do think that a lot of what the guide is hoping to do is really to highlight just how much complexity there is in this, and that it's much better to think those things through earlier rather than later. So we actually have a number of questions coming in that I want to ask. The first, Katerina, in School 9, are the students required to stay for the full 8-hour day?
Yes. So part of the strategy in efficiency of delivery of program was to actually shift the school dismissal. So instead of spending, let's say, $200,000 a year to send a second shift of buses through, what we did was we changed the dismissal time for all of the students. And so those funds, instead of being used on gas and bus driver costs, and extra buses, were redirected towards supporting the instructional delivery and direct service to students.
Thanks. So a couple of questions have come in that I just want to answer about the competitive expanded learning time grant. So the grant has not been released yet, so we cannot say for sure what is in it. We can only say what was in the budget language that set up the grant, which was certainly vaguer or more vague than the RFP itself will be. It does not, the budget language does not specify that that grant program is only going to be available to priority schools. It does specify schools with a high level of need. That can be defined in a number of different ways, and at this time we don't know for sure how the State Education Department is likely to define that. And the grant programs will be available full state. We suspect from things that we have heard from the governor's office that there is a great deal of interest in having at least some of the expanded learning time and community schools grants be located in places outside the Big Five. So I really do want to stress that if you're in a smaller district or a district not in a city, that in no way means that you are not going to be eligible for the community schools or the expanded learning time grant. We very much think that there will be a lot of interest in those kinds of locations for programs. So quick question. Oh, and then one other question I want to answer, and then another question for you, Katerina. The relationship between the expanded learning time and the 21st Century Program. I think this is an important thing to clarify. So for those of you who are familiar with the federal 21st Century funds, that is a grant program that has traditionally been available for after-school programs. In the most recent round, round 6, there was also an option to use those funds for an expanded learning time program. The lines between an expanded learning time program and a really strong school community partnership with an after-school program can be a little blurry, but there are really very important distinctions. The most important being that it is thought of as a single comprehensive school day, as Katerina just identified. Students are actually expected to be there for the full length of time, and there is an expectation that there is full integration between the community partner and the school so that for students it appears seamless. One thing that begins to happen is, I think Katerina mentioned with the staggered teacher schedule, you then can have community organizations actually providing activities earlier during the day, so really adding enrichment opportunities where there's a need within the school schedule rather than just during the after-school space. Okay, so another question that came in for Katerina. What was the process like in changing the culture from seeing after school as an add-on to seeing it as an active part of the school day?
So that's something we're still working on. The initial planning that happened so quickly between last July and September kind of tagged on the extra time to either the beginning or the end of the day. I call it bookending. We bookended the day with these extra activities because we already had people hired, we already had hours established, and so we were adding it on. During this planning and refinement process for next year's implementation, we've looked at National Center for Time and Learning's research and guidance around efficiencies that can be gained by actually staggering those enrichment and differentiated support opportunities throughout the longer school day. So I always use like the visual, a visual that it's like your whole day is like a stack of Legos. And so if you picture 8 Legos in that stack that represent your current 8 periods of a regular school day, and now you add 2 blue Legos that represent your expanded learning time, those 2 blue Legos can now move anywhere within that stack. They don't just have to go on the top or at the bottom. And so that shift is what we're working on. We're actually doing some community level work with the Greater Rochester After School Alliance in building up through the use of the Weichert Center Youth Program Quality Initiative and assessment tools to really work up and build up the level of program quality that's out there so that we have a common standard community-wide, and will help support the development of both our staff and of community partners and providers to work towards this vision of true integration.
Thanks, Katerina. Another question that I think actually both Katerina and Tracy, you may have some thoughts on. Does it make sense for schools implementing expanded learning time to work with multiple community partners? For instance, one that is strong in STEM, one that is strong in serving students for whom English is a second language. Or what are your thoughts on that process?
Sure. Well, speaking just from our experience here at Think Together, we definitely partner with outside resources. I think the key to doing that is, again, aligning with the goals of the school day. So if they're doing a heavy science or math focus, you could partner with a group that does do that themselves or specialize in that. I think a key to doing that, though, is having someone who facilitates that relationship and whose job it is to do that. Otherwise, you're going to have multiple entities trying to do something in the same period of time without much cohesion. So I think someone who is managing that relationship, so to speak, would be able to help facilitate that the most. But I definitely think partnering with outside entities, especially to align with any sort of goals that the school has, is a great idea.
Yeah, I think, if there were one word to sum it up, I would say intentional partnerships. So what this did was it put a test of alignment, intentionality, and strategy to any existing partnerships that were already in these schools. And the district has to make a shift, and the community provider has to make a shift to come to this common ground and new definition of what expanded learning looks like. And change is hard for everybody. And I think that intentionality is what's key to guiding, if there are multiple partners involved, how do they fit and how do they support the goals?
Great, thank you. And one last question. Do you have additional after-school programs in the Rochester model beyond the expanded learning time? Or does your expanded learning time extend far enough that you no longer need additional after-school time?
No, I think there's definitely space for that additional after-school time. So I'm beginning to explore right now the idea of perhaps on-site school-age child care providers that would extend past the expanded learning hours, because we're still talking about sending kids home, around 4:30. So there's still plenty of time for after-school programming after that. But what we're looking at is that would be for a subset of the population, not the entire school. And that would be the difference.
Thank you. And that is something that we really highlight within the guide when you take a look at the elementary school models and the questions that we really recommend folks ask in planning an elementary school program is precisely this question of meeting the needs of working parents when students should not be left home alone unattended. And so it is, I think, a real balance point that those of you who are thinking about elementary school expanded learning time will need to think through, is how to make sure that kids are safe during all the hours when they need that support. Okay, I'm sorry, a few more questions coming in. I know some of you may need to drop off, but I do want to seize the opportunity to go ahead and answer people's questions. So a couple of questions have come in that I just want to clarify around voluntary participation versus mandatory participation. With expanded learning time, that really is up to the school to determine. In most cases, people, if they're really thinking about an expanded learning time structure, are thinking about mandatory attendance. They're thinking about actually officially extending the full school day, because that's part of what makes this a true expansion as opposed to just a closely integrated after-school program. However, in the what the state education department has said about the requirement for priority schools to add 200 hours next year is that it can be either mandatory or voluntary. So again, it's really important that you take a look at the written guidance that state education department has put out for your specific situation. We certainly are not speaking about those particularities, and we wouldn't want to lead anyone astray. So definitely look at that guidance. Similarly, with the anticipated RFP for the grant program, we have not yet seen it. It has not yet been released. We at NYSAN will share it through our listserv the moment that we do see it. It also will get posted on the State Education Department's website, but we will certainly be doing our best to alert people when that is available. And then in terms of, again, with the that grant program, we don't know yet if there is going to be an emphasis within it on priority schools or not. We do know that the RFP, that the language in the budget says high need. It does not say priority schools. So we're waiting to see what the RFP says to better know how the State Education Department is going to use those grant funds. And so we certainly will share that as soon as we know. So then the last question for Katerina, so far at least, is what your start and end times are for your model in Rochester.
Right. So at School 9, and this is one of the other adjustments, we started with 7:45 to 5 o'clock school day. We are scaling that back a little bit, where the mandatory piece will be till 4 o'clock next year, and looking for enhanced offerings that will be for some students that would continue on till 6.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Are there other questions before we close up? I just wanted to share, again, with all of you, for those of you who are not familiar with NYSAN, you can find more information on our website, nysan.org, which, again, is where you will find the guide, which we are offering for free, and you can certainly please do download and share. We also will be, you can also sign up through our website for our listserv, where we will share any information we get about the RFP when we get it. I really want to thank both Tracy and Katerina for taking the time to share their experiences with us today. I hope that you all found it as helpful as I did to hear from the on-the-ground experts who really are leading these kinds of high-quality, effective, integrated partnerships. We are making available, as you can see, their contact information if you have follow-up questions for them or for me. And we really want to thank you all for sharing your time with us today. We will be posting this recording of the webinar on our website as well, along with the slides. And again, we encourage you to make use of those resources, share them, and ask us if you have any additional questions. Thank you so much.